You feed beggars for free? The words cut through the market noise like a snapped string. A few heads turned. Then laughter followed, sharp, careless, loud. A phone camera lifted almost instantly, its lens aimed straight at the small food stall where the woman's hands froze mid-motion, a ladle hovering above a cracked steel plate. She didn't look up right away. The market was alive as always. Vendors shouting prices, motorbikes squeezing through gaps too narrow for comfort, oil popping angrily in pans. Her shop was nothing more than a patched tin roof, 2 gas burners, and a wooden counter worn smooth by years of work. Steam rose from the pot of rice, fogging the air. The smell of lentils mixed with dust and sweat. Behind the counter stood her, plain clothes, hair tied back too tightly, bangles dulled from use. In front of the stall, sitting on overturned crates, were 3 boys. Identical. Same narrow shoulders, same sunburnt skin, same quiet posture. They ate slowly, heads lowered, movements careful. Not like beggars. Like guests who didn't want to take too much. You didn't hear me? The man said again, louder now. She finally looked up. The millionaire stood just a few steps away, blocking half her stall with his presence. Crisp white shirt. Sunglasses pushed onto perfectly styled hair. A watch that caught the sunlight every time he moved his wrist. Gold. Heavy, unnecessary. 2 men hovered behind him, smiling like they were waiting for a punchline. I asked, he continued, lips curling into something that pretended to be a smile, do you feed beggars every day? Or is today charity day? The crowd tightened around them. Someone snorted. Someone else laughed openly. A woman whispered to her friend. Another phone rose into the air. The woman lowered the ladle and gently placed the plate in front of the nearest boy. Her fingers trembled for half a second before she pulled her hand back and wiped it on her apron. They're hungry, she said. Her voice was calm. Too calm for the situation. No apology. No explanation. That only made the laughter louder. The millionaire chuckled, adjusting his watch. Hungry, he repeated, like the word amused him. Everyone's hungry. That doesn't mean you run a free kitchen. One of the boys stiffened. Another glanced up for just a moment, eyes sharp, alert, before lowering his gaze again. The third kept eating, chewing slowly, deliberately, as if blocking out the noise. The woman noticed. She always noticed. I'm working, she said quietly, already turning back to the pot. Oh, no, the millionaire said, stepping closer. His shadow fell across the counter. Now you've got my attention. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. This was better than bargaining over tomatoes. This was entertainment. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sound generous. You know what happens when you encourage this kind of thing? He asked, gesturing vaguely at the boys. They come back. They bring friends. Soon your shop is full of them and paying customers disappear. She didn't respond. Her silence annoyed him. I mean, he added, straightening up louder now, unless you enjoy wasting money. She met his eyes then. For the first time, there was no anger in her expression. No fear either. Just something steady. Unmoved. I don't waste food, she said. A few laughs died out, confused. That wasn't the answer they expected. The millionaire blinked, then laughed again, a little too hard. Listen to her, he said to the crowd. A philosopher. Someone behind him shouted, show her how business works. Another voice chimed in, yeah, teach her? The boys remained silent. 3 still figures amid the noise. But the woman felt it, something tightening in the air. The sound of the market seemed to dull, like cotton stuffed in her ears. She glanced at the boys, then back at the man. Please, she said, not begging, just firm. Let us eat. That did it. The millionaire's smile thinned. His pride had been nicked just slightly, and it showed. You're stubborn, he said. But kindness like this? He shook his head. It keeps people exactly where they are. The crowd murmured in agreement. None of them noticed the sound at first. A low rumble. Deep. Distant. One of the boys paused mid-bite. His eyes lifted, not toward the man, not toward the crowd, but toward the far end of the road behind the stall. Then another rumble joined it. The woman didn't hear it yet, but the dust at the edge of the market began to rise. The dust rose first. Not in a dramatic cloud, not yet. Just a faint disturbance at the far end of the road, where the market thinned into broken pavement and rusted signboards. Most people didn't notice. They were too busy watching the spectacle forming around the small food stall, too invested in the slow humiliation unfolding like street theater. But the boys noticed. The second rumble rolled in, deeper this time, vibrating faintly through the ground. One of the triplets set his spoon down carefully, aligning it parallel to the edge of the plate. Another straightened his back, shoulders squaring on instinct. The third tilted his head, listening, not afraid, not surprised, just alert. The woman still hadn't turned around. She was focused on the counter now, wiping a patch that was already clean. It was something she did when the world pressed too close, small, repetitive movements to keep herself steady. The voices around her blurred together, rising and falling like waves. "You see?" the millionaire was saying, arms spread wide as if delivering a lesson. "This is exactly the problem. You think you're helping, but you're not. You're encouraging dependency." A man in the crowd nodded vigorously. Someone else laughed. The millionaire leaned one elbow on the counter without asking, his cuff brushing dangerously close to the pot of lentils. "Tell me," he continued, lowering his voice again, the way men did when they wanted to sound reasonable. "How much do you make in a day here? Enough to feed yourself? Or are you just pretending to be noble?" Her fingers paused. For a moment, it looked like she might answer. Her lips parted slightly, breath drawn in. The crowd leaned forward, sensing something, defiance, maybe, or collapse. Instead, she picked up the ladle again. "I didn't ask for advice," she said. The calmness of it landed heavier than shouting would have. The millionaire straightened, surprised. His assistants exchanged glances. The phone stayed raised. "Careful," he said, smile tight now. "People like me can be very helpful or very inconvenient." That earned a few impressed murmurs. Power recognized power. She met his gaze again, just briefly. "Then please be helpful," she said. "And move." The word move echoed oddly in the space between them. Someone laughed, but it sounded forced. The millionaire scoffed. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you?" "I know who I'm feeding," she replied. A hush crept in. Thin. Uncertain. Behind her, the boys exchanged a look. Quick, wordless. The smallest of them reached out and gently touched her sleeve. Just once, as if to warn her. She felt it but didn't turn. The millionaire noticed the gesture and smirked. "Look at that," he said loudly. "Protective already. That's cute." One of the boys looked up then. Fully this time. His eyes locked onto the man's face, not with anger, but with something colder. Measuring. Remembering. The millionaire laughed it off. "Relax, kid. I'm just talking." Talking. That word hung there, fragile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of bills, peeling one off with exaggerated slowness. The crowd's attention sharpened instantly. Money always did that. "Here," he said, placing the bill on the counter. "This should cover their meal. And maybe yours too. For today." She stared at the bill. It might as well have been a stain. "I didn't ask for money," she said again. "Don't be proud," he replied. "Take it. You'll need it." Her jaw tightened, just a fraction. "Please," she said more firmly now. "Take it back." The crowd murmured. This was no longer amusing, it was uncomfortable. The millionaire's patience snapped. "Unbelievable," he muttered, then louder. "Fine. Let's make this simple." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice like a host reclaiming a room. "What do you all think? Should a woman who can barely run a stall be teaching the world about generosity?" A few laughs answered him, enough to encourage him. "And these three," he continued, pointing at the boys. "Do you really think they'll remember this kindness when they grow up? Or will they just take and disappear?" The smallest boy's hands curled into fists beneath the counter. The woman inhaled slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She pushed the bill back toward him. "I don't feed people so they owe me," she said. "I feed them because I can." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. For a split second, no one spoke. Then the millionaire laughed sharply, a sound edged with irritation. "That's very poetic," he said. "But poetry doesn't pay bills." He leaned in closer now, voice dropping, venomous. "Let me tell you something. Kindness, like yours, keeps people poor. It keeps them exactly where they belong." The word belong struck something deep. Her hand trembled, just once. She set the ladle down carefully, afraid it might spill if she didn't. When she looked up again, her eyes were shining, but she didn't blink. "They don't belong on the street," she said. "No one does." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone lowered their phone. The millionaire rolled his eyes. "You're impossible." He straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "All right then. Let's do this differently." He raised his voice again. "I'll double it. No, triple it." He slapped more bills onto the counter, the sound sharp and final. "Take the money. Stop feeding them. Today." "That's my offer." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. This had turned into a test. Money versus dignity. Survival versus principle. The woman stared at the bills. They represented weeks of earnings. Rent. Gas. Maybe a new burner. Fewer sleepless nights. Her silence stretched. The boys watched her now, faces unreadable. One of them shook his head almost imperceptibly. She pushed the money back again. "No," she said. The word landed like a stone dropped into water. Final. Unmovable. The millionaire's face hardened. "Then you're a fool." He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine. Keep feeding them. Let's see where it gets you." The crowd began to murmur again, energy shifting, uncertain which side to lean toward now. That was when the sound became impossible to ignore. A low, synchronized hum. Powerful. Controlled. Engines. Not one. Several. People began to turn their heads. Conversations faltered. A few phones shifted direction instinctively, drawn by the noise. The woman frowned slightly, distracted for the first time. Behind her, the boys stood up. All three at once. Their movements were calm, precise. One brushed crumbs from his shirt. Another adjusted his collar. The third stepped half a pace closer to her, positioning himself subtly between her and the crowd. She noticed then. Not the engines, but the change in them. "Sit," she whispered, startled. "Finish eating." One of the boys looked at her, eyes softening. "Thank you," he said quietly. It was the first time any of them had spoken today. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the road. The first black Mercedes-Benz rolled into view, slow and deliberate, paint gleaming even under the harsh sun. Then another, and another. 4 in total. They moved like a formation, engines purring in perfect unison, coming to a smooth stop just beyond the market's edge. Silence swallowed the crowd. The millionaire frowned, irritation flickering across his face as he turned to look. "What is this?" he muttered. The car doors remained closed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The boys stood perfectly still. And for the first time since this began, the woman felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not fear. Anticipation. She almost didn't stop that day. The memory came back to her in fragments, not as a clean picture but as sensations. Heat pressing down on her shoulders, the ache in her lower back, the sharp smell of burnt oil clinging to her clothes. It had been one of those afternoons when the sun felt personal, like it had chosen her alone to punish. She had been closing early. The pot was nearly empty, the last of the rice scraped thin against the bottom. Her feet hurt. Her head throbbed. All she wanted was to pull the shutter down and disappear into the quiet of her one-room home. That was when she heard it. "Ma'am." Not loud. Not demanding. Just a small voice, carried uncertainly through the noise of the road. She didn't turn at first. People asked for things all the time. Directions. Discounts. Handouts. She had learned, painfully, that answering every call left you with nothing for yourself. "Ma'am, please." She sighed and turned. They stood a few steps away from the stall, 3 boys, side by side, like they had practiced it. Identical faces, dusty clothes hanging loose on thin frames. One of them held a torn backpack to his chest with both hands, knuckles white. Another kept glancing behind them, alert, cautious. The third looked straight at her, eyes steady in a way that didn't match his age. She noticed immediately that none of them stepped closer. "Yes?" she asked, tired more than kind. The smallest boy swallowed. If we help you clean," he said, choosing each word carefully. "Could we have some food?" Something in her chest tightened. Not the request. The way he said it. Not can we have food, but can we work? Not begging. Negotiating. She looked at the pot. Barely enough for one more plate. Maybe two if she stretched it. She thought of dinner for herself. Of the long walk home. Of tomorrow's expenses already waiting. She almost said no. Instead, she nodded toward the counter.
"Sweep first," she said.
"Then we'll see." They moved instantly. Two instantly. One grabbed the broom, working in neat, efficient strokes. Another began stacking plates without being told. The third wiped the counter, careful not to splash water near the burner. They didn't talk. They didn't joke. They worked like people who had learned not to waste chances. When they were done, the stall looked better than it had all day. She stared at them for a long moment, then picked up the ladle. That was the first plate of rice. She remembered how they'd eaten, slowly, respectfully, backs straight despite the hunger she could see in their hands. No fighting over bites. No rushing. When one finished early, he waited. When another dropped a grain, he picked it up quietly and ate it. "Where are your parents?" she had asked, gently, not looking directly at them. They had exchanged a glance.
"Quick. Practiced."
"Gone," they said together. "Not dead. Not lost.
Gone."
She didn't ask again. From that day on, they came back. Not every day at first. Sometimes weeks passed. Sometimes months. But whenever they appeared, it was the same routine. They waited until she noticed them. They offered to work. They never asked twice. When business was bad, she gave them leftovers. When business was good, she cooked a little extra. Once, during a heavy rain, she found them huddled under her stall's tin roof, soaked and shivering. Without a word, she handed them towels from her bag and turned the burner back on. They had watched her like she was doing something extraordinary. "It's just food," she had said then, almost embarrassed by their stares. But the looks they exchanged told her they knew better. Over the years, she noticed things. They learned fast. Too fast. One fixed her broken gas knob with a piece of wire and tape, hands steady, confident. Another helped a neighboring vendor calculate change when customers complained. The third once corrected a newspaper headline softly, under his breath, before folding the page and setting it aside. At night, when she closed up, she sometimes saw them sitting together under a streetlight, sharing a book so worn its cover had fallen off. They read quietly, taking turns tracing the lines with their fingers. Still, she never asked where they slept, never asked where they went after. She had learned that kindness didn't need a full history to exist. The memory shifted again. One evening, she remembered this clearly. A black car had slowed near her stall. Expensive.
Polished.
Out of place. The boys had stiffened instantly. One had grabbed the other's wrist. Another had stepped half a pace back, eyes sharp, scanning. The car didn't stop. It rolled on. But the boys had not relaxed for a long time after. That night, when she handed them food, her hand had brushed one boy's sleeve. She felt it then, muscle, firm and trained beneath thin fabric. Not the body of a starving child. She had looked at him, startled. He had met her gaze calmly and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Nothing more. She hadn't asked questions. Now, in the present, standing in her stall as 4 black Mercedes sat idling at the edge of the market, that memory pressed hard against her chest. The boys stood behind her, not as children waiting to be fed, but as something else entirely. And for the first time, she wondered, quietly, almost fearfully, "Who have I been feeding all these years? Look at them," the millionaire said, his voice sharp with disdain. Standing there like guards. A few uneasy laughs followed, thinner than before. The crowd's energy had shifted, still curious, still watching, but no longer fully on his side. The 4 black Mercedes idled at the edge of the market, engines humming low and steady, like restrained beasts. Their presence pressed on the air, heavy and undeniable. The woman stood frozen behind her counter. She could feel the boys behind her now, not touching, not crowding, just there. Close enough that she sensed their breathing, calm and measured. It was strange. For years, she had thought of herself as the protector. Now, without knowing why, she felt something subtly reverse. "Sit down," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Please." None of them did. The smallest of the 3 shifted instead, positioning himself slightly to her left, blocking the millionaire's direct line of sight to her hands. It was instinctive,
Practiced.
and so smooth that most of the crowd didn't notice. The millionaire did. "Oh," he said, amused. "Now they don't listen to you?" She turned to look at him fully, something hard rising in her chest.
They don't have to, she said.
"They're not doing anything wrong." That was the moment the millionaire's smile disappeared entirely. "You're defending them now," he scoffed. "After everything I said, you still don't get it." He gestured broadly at the market. "People like you think kindness makes you noble, but all it really does is make you blind." The word blind stung. She straightened, shoulders squaring despite the ache that never quite left them. "I see very clearly," she said. "I see 3 boys who work when they eat. I see people laughing because they think they're better." The crowd murmured. Someone shifted their weight. A phone lowered. The millionaire laughed, but there was no humor in it now. "Careful," he warned. "You're getting brave." She didn't answer. Behind her, one of the boys clenched his jaw. Another scanned the edges of the gathering, eyes flicking to the cars, then to the rooftops, then back again. The 3rd watched the millionaire, calm, assessing, as if committing his face to memory. The outsider allies stood a little apart from the crowd. He hadn't said a word since the cars arrived. A man in his late 50s, neatly dressed but without excess. No flashy watch. No entourage. Just a quiet authority that didn't demand attention, yet held it. He studied the scene with narrowed eyes, taking in details others missed. The boy's posture, the woman's refusal to bend, the millionaire's rising agitation. The millionaire noticed him too. Still watching, he called out mockingly, "Enjoying the show?" The man didn't respond, just crossed his arms. That silence irritated the millionaire almost as much as hers had. "You know what I think?" the millionaire continued, turning back to the woman. "I think you like this. The attention. Playing the saint in front of everyone." She shook her head slowly. "I like peace," she said. "You brought noise." A few people nodded before they caught themselves. The millionaire's face flushed. "Enough," he snapped. "I tried being generous." He reached into his pocket again, then stopped himself, as if suddenly offended by the idea. "You know what? Keep your stall. Keep your charity. Let's see how long it lasts." He stepped back, folding his arms. "But don't act surprised when they steal from you. Or worse." That did it. Her breath caught. Her hands curled against the edge of the counter, knuckles whitening. For years, she had endured insults about her shop, her clothes, her choices. She had learned to swallow them. But this was different. "They have never taken anything," she said, voice shaking despite her effort. "Not once." The millionaire raised an eyebrow.
Yet.
The crowd shifted again, discomfort rippling outward. This was no longer amusing. It was ugly. One of the boys stepped forward. Just one step. The woman felt it immediately and turned. "No," she whispered.
"Please." He stopped.
But he didn't step back. "Sir," the boy said, his voice calm, steady, far older than his years. "You should leave." The market went dead quiet. The millionaire stared at him, incredulous. "Excuse me? You've said enough," the boy continued. "You're upsetting her." The word her landed heavily. The millionaire barked a laugh. "Listen to this one," he said to the crowd. "They're learning manners now." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You don't tell me what to do." For the first time, The boy smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cruel. It was brief and controlled, like someone acknowledging a predictable outcome. I wasn't asking, he said. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. The outsider ally straightened. The engines hummed a little louder. The woman's heart pounded. Please, she said again. To the boy this time. It's all right. He glanced back at her. The look in his eyes softened instantly. We know, he said quietly.
We.
The millionaire scoffed, but his confidence wavered now. He looked from the boy to the cars, then back to the woman. What is this? He muttered. Some kind of setup? The outsider ally finally spoke. Not a setup, he said calmly. A consequence. All heads turned. The millionaire frowned. Do I know you? You should, the man replied. But that's not important right now. He nodded toward the boys. What's important is that you stop. The millionaire's jaw tightened. Or what? The man met his gaze without blinking. Or you'll embarrass yourself. A tense beat passed. Then the first Mercedes door opened. Slowly.
Deliberately.
A man in a dark suit stepped out, earpiece in place, scanning the surroundings with professional efficiency. Then another door. Another man. Then another. Security. The crowd gasped. The millionaire's bravado faltered visibly now. What is going on? He demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. The woman stared, overwhelmed. She felt suddenly small, exposed, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning. One of the boys stepped closer to her again, not touching, just near enough that she felt anchored. Do you remember, he asked softly, the night it rained so hard the road flooded? She nodded automatically. Of course she remembered. How could she forget? You gave us extra food, he continued, and plastic bags for our books. Her throat tightened. That night, he said, was the reason we survived. She turned to look at him, eyes wide, but before she could speak, a voice cut through the air. Ma'am. It came from one of the suited men approaching respectfully. He stopped a few steps away and bowed his head slightly. We've been looking for you. The crowd erupted into whispers. The millionaire staggered back half a step, disbelief written across his face. This is ridiculous, he said weakly. But no one was listening to him anymore. The outsider ally stepped forward, his voice clear, authoritative. These boys, he said, were taken from their home years ago. Declared lost. Declared dead, in some reports. A hush fell so complete that even the engines seemed to quiet. They weren't, the man continued, because someone fed them,
Sheltered them.
asked nothing in return. All eyes turned to the woman. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. I just cooked food, she whispered. The millionaire opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. The outsider ally fixed him with a steady gaze. And you, he said, just showed everyone who you really are. The market held its breath. The woman felt tears blur her vision, not of fear, but of something rising, something she didn't yet understand. Behind her, the boys stood tall. And somewhere deep inside, a truth began to take shape. The men in those cars hadn't come for her. They had come because of her. 4 doors opened at the same time. Not slammed, not rushed. They opened slowly, deliberately, like a signal meant to be seen. The market seemed to exhale in one collective breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. A vendor's raised hand froze in the air. Somewhere, a radio kept playing, absurdly cheerful, until someone snapped it off. From the first Mercedes stepped a man in a dark suit, posture straight, eyes already scanning the surroundings with trained precision. From the second, another, taller, broader, hand brushing briefly against the inside of his jacket before falling naturally at his side. The third door revealed a woman, composed and sharp-eyed, hair pulled back tight. The fourth remained closed for a beat longer than the rest. The millionaire swallowed. What is this? He demanded, but the question sounded thin now, fraying at the edges. No one answered him. The suited figures moved in sync, spreading out just enough to form a quiet perimeter. Not aggressive. Controlled. Professional. the kind of presence that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. The woman behind the food stall felt her knees weaken. She gripped the counter, fingers digging into the worn wood. The steam from the pot blurred her vision, or maybe it was tears. She couldn't tell anymore. "This is a mistake," the millionaire said quickly, laughter bubbling up again, forced and hollow. "You've got the wrong place. I'm in the middle of something." The third boy, the one who had spoken earlier, shifted his weight slightly. The fourth door opened. A man stepped out slowly, adjusting his cufflinks as he did. He was older than the others, silver threading through his dark hair, his face lined not with age, but with restraint. His eyes moved over the crowd once, then again, sharper the second time, as if matching faces to memories. When his gaze landed on the boys, it stopped.
Everything in him changed.
The crowd felt it, even if they didn't understand it. The subtle straightening of his back, the tight breath drawn through his nose, the way his hands clenched, just for a moment, before relaxing again. He took a step forward, then another. The boys didn't move. The woman watched him approach, heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. Instinct screamed at her to step in front of the boys, to shield them from whatever this was, but her feet wouldn't move. The man stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the man said softly, almost reverently, "You're alive." The words landed like thunder. The smallest boy nodded once. "Yes, sir."
"Sir."
The millionaire's face drained of color. "Alive," he echoed weakly. "What does that mean?" The man raised a hand without looking at him. Silence snapped into place. He looked at the boys again, eyes shining now, no longer restrained. "We searched for you," he said, voice tight. "For years." The second boy's jaw flexed. "We know. You were declared." The man stopped himself, swallowing hard. "We were told you were gone." "We weren't," the third boy said calmly. The outsider allies stepped forward then, standing beside the man. "Because someone intervened," he said, nodding toward the stall. All eyes turned. The woman felt the weight of it crush down on her. She shook her head, confused, overwhelmed. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't." The older man turned to her. When he looked at her, the hardness vanished entirely. "You fed them," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded slowly. "They were hungry." The man closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them again, they were wet. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what that cost you, and what it saved." The millionaire stumbled forward, waving his hands. "Hold on. This is getting ridiculous. Who are you people?" The man finally looked at him. It was like turning a spotlight onto something that didn't want to be seen. "You don't remember," the man said. "Of course you don't." The outsider ally spoke instead, voice clear and carrying. "These boys are the triplet sons of Arvind Malhotra." A ripple of shock tore through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone whispered the name aloud, as if saying it too loudly might draw consequences. The millionaire's mouth opened, then closed. "That's impossible," he said hoarsely. "Malhotra's children were kidnapped," the outsider ally finished, "during a corporate power struggle you benefited from." Every phone in the crowd swung back toward the millionaire now. He laughed once, sharp and panicked. That was years ago. Charges were dropped. There was no proof. The older man, Arvind Malhotra, took a step closer. "No proof," he repeated softly, "because my sons disappeared." He turned back to the boys, his composure cracking for the first time. "You survived on the street," he said, pain threading through every word. "Why didn't you come to us?" The boys exchanged a glance. "Because we were told," the smallest said, "that anyone connected to you was dangerous." Arvind's face tightened.
"Who told you that?"
The boy's eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the millionaire. The silence that followed was suffocating. The crowd shifted, bodies angling away from the man who had been mocking a food vendor just minutes ago. The millionaire backed up instinctively. "This is absurd," he muttered. "You can't pin this on me." The outsider ally stepped forward, voice cutting through the noise. "No one needs to pin anything," he said. The truth arrived on its own. He gestured to the cars. And so did the evidence. One of the suited women opened a tablet, screen glowing. Documents flashed briefly, photos, dates, signatures. The millionaire's bravado collapsed in real time. His shoulders sagged. Sweat beaded at his temple. "This is a misunderstanding," he said weakly. "We can talk privately." "No," Arvind said firmly. "You've said enough in public. It's only fair." He turned back to the woman behind the stall. She was crying openly now, tears spilling down her cheeks without sound. She wiped at them with the edge of her apron, embarrassed. "I never asked them who they were," she said. "I didn't want to know.
I just wanted them to eat."
Arvind stepped closer, stopping at the counter, careful not to intrude. "That," he said, voice breaking, "is exactly why they lived." He bowed his head to her.
A full bow.
The crowd gasped. She reached out instinctively, flustered. "Please don't." But he straightened and looked at her with absolute certainty. "My sons owe you their lives," he said. "And so do I." The boys moved then, stepping to her side, not behind her, not in front, beside her. "We never forgot," one of them said quietly. "Every plate. Every night." The smallest added, "We came back today because we wanted to thank you." The woman laughed through her tears, a small, disbelieving sound. "You already did," she said. "You came back." Behind them, the millionaire stood alone now, the crowd unconsciously creating distance. His voice cracked as he tried one last time. "You can't ruin me over this." Arvind didn't even look at him. "You ruined yourself," he said calmly, "by choosing cruelty when no one forced you to." The engines cut off. The sudden silence felt final. The woman looked around at the market she had known all her life. The same stalls, the same dust, the same people staring at her with new eyes. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. As Arvind gestured gently toward the cars, the boys turned to her. "Come with us," one said. "Just for a while." She shook her head instinctively. "My shop." "We'll wait," he replied. "Like you waited for us." Her breath caught. And in the distance, someone began to clap.
Slowly.
Tentatively. Then another. And another. Until the sound filled the market. No longer laughter, but something far heavier. Respect. The clapping didn't come all at once. It started with one man near the spice stall, an older vendor who had watched her work for years without ever really seeing her. He brought his hands together once, awkwardly, as if unsure whether he was allowed to. Then, again. The sound was thin, almost embarrassed. Someone else joined in. Then another, until the noise swelled, spreading through the market like a slow tide, washing away the laughter that had filled this same space only minutes ago. The woman stood still behind her counter, stunned. She felt as if the ground beneath her had tilted, as if she might slide out of the moment if she moved too suddenly.
Her ears rang.
Her heart raced. "Please," she said softly, raising one hand. "You don't need to." But the applause didn't stop. Arvind Malhotra watched her with a look she couldn't read, part gratitude, part grief, part something heavier, like a debt too large to be repaid easily. He turned to the boys again, his voice steadier now.
"Tell them," he said.
The smallest of the triplets took a breath. When he spoke, it was clear and even, carrying easily over the crowd. "Our names are Arav, Rohan, and Kunal Malhotra." The name landed like a dropped plate. Whispers rippled outward instantly. Malhotra. The family name carried weight far beyond the market, corporate headlines, courtrooms, political backrooms. A name that opened doors and closed mouths. The millionaire staggered back another step. "No," he said hoarsely. "That's not possible." The outsider ally turned toward him slowly. "It is," he said. "And it always was." He faced the crowd now, voice rising just enough to be heard. These boys were kidnapped during a hostile corporate takeover. Their disappearance allowed certain people to consolidate power without opposition. Several heads turned toward the millionaire. Phones rose again, but this time they weren't pointed at the woman. The millionaire shook his head, hands lifting defensively. This is a setup. A smear. You can't just rewrite history because of some street drama. Arvind finally looked at him fully again. You rewrote it first, he said quietly. By erasing my children. The words cut deep. The woman watched the exchange, trying to keep up, trying to understand how her small acts, extra rice, a plastic bag, a place to sit, had somehow intersected with a story this large. I didn't know, she whispered, almost to herself. Arav, she recognized his voice now, turned to her. You didn't need to, he said. That's why it mattered. Arvind stepped closer to the counter again, careful, respectful. We tracked them for years, he explained gently, as if afraid to overwhelm her. False leads.
Bribes. Threats.
And then nothing.
He paused.
Until one of my security teams noticed a pattern. 3 boys. Always together. Always near this market. The crowd leaned in, hungry for every word now. They refused help, Arvind continued. Refused shelters. Refused programs. We couldn't understand why. Rohan spoke up. Because we were hiding. From me? Arvind asked softly. From everyone, Kunal replied. We were told the people who took us still had eyes everywhere. The outsider ally nodded.
They were smart, he said.
Too smart for their age. The millionaire laughed bitterly. So you're praising them now? He snapped. For living like beggars? Arav turned to him, expression unreadable. We weren't beggars, he said. We worked. We learned. We survived. And you, Rohan added calmly, used other people's losses to climb. The millionaire's face reddened. Watch your tone, he barked. Arvind raised a hand. No, he said. Let them speak. The power shift was complete. Rohan continued, eyes never leaving the millionaire. You were there the day we disappeared. A murmur swept the crowd. The millionaire froze. That's a lie. You visited our house, Kunal said. You shook our father's hand. Arvind closed his eyes briefly, pain flashing across his face. You told us, Arav added, that you'd bring us gifts. The millionaire's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The outsider ally stepped forward, voice firm. Security footage. Witness statements. Financial records. All preserved. He tapped the tablet lightly. We didn't come here to accuse. We came to confirm. The millionaire's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of a nearby stall to steady himself. The woman felt sick. She had fed these boys for years without knowing the darkness that followed them. And yet, standing here now, she felt no fear, only a strange, aching pride. You're safe now, she said suddenly to the boys. They turned to her at once. Arav smiled softly. We were safe because of you. Arvind inhaled sharply, emotion finally breaking through his controlled exterior. Ma'am, he said, voice thick, you gave my sons something I couldn't. She shook her head. I just gave them food. You gave them dignity, the outsider ally corrected. The words settled over the crowd, heavy and undeniable. The millionaire straightened suddenly, desperation hardening his features. All right, he said, forcing a smile. Let's talk solutions. Compensation. Partnerships. We don't need to ruin anyone. A few people scoffed openly now. Arvind turned to him slowly. You think this is about money? He shook his head. This is about truth. He gestured toward the woman. You mocked her kindness. You tried to buy her silence. The millionaire's eyes flicked to her, then away. And now, Arvind continued, voice calm but lethal, you will answer for what you did. The crowd watched in stunned silence as one of the suited officers stepped forward, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, the man said quietly. They're confirmed. The millionaire's shoulders slumped. The woman felt a hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Kunal standing beside her, his grip gentle but steady. She squeezed back without thinking. Whatever happens next, she said softly, don't forget who you are. He smiled. We won't. Because you showed us. The outsider ally addressed the crowd one last time. Remember this, he said. Power reveals itself not in what you own, but in how you treat those who can give you nothing. Silence followed. Then, slowly, people began to step back, away from the millionaire, toward the woman. Space opened around her stall like a protective circle. Arvind looked at his sons, then at her. "Come with us," he said again gently. "Let us take care of you now." She hesitated, glancing at her pots, her counter, the life she had built one plate at a time. "I don't know how to live anywhere else," she admitted. Arav smiled. "Then we'll learn," he said. "Together." The millionaire sank onto a crate, head in his hands unnoticed. And in the middle of the market, the woman who had fed 3 hungry boys daily stood surrounded by a truth far larger than she had ever imagined, one that had already begun to rewrite every life it touched. The market had never been this quiet. Not during early mornings, not during heavy rains, not even during strikes. This silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with realization, thick with shame. All eyes were on the woman. She stood exactly where she had always stood, behind the same worn counter, beside the same dented pots, yet the way people looked at her had changed completely. The laughter that once floated easily now felt impossible, like a language no one dared speak anymore. The outsider ally was the first to break the silence. "Step forward," he said, not loudly, but with a tone that carried authority. He wasn't speaking to her. He was speaking to the millionaire. The man looked up slowly from where he sat on the crate. His expensive shirt was creased now. His watch caught the sunlight again, but this time it looked gaudy, desperate, like a costume worn too long. "Why?" the millionaire asked, voice hoarse. "So, you can parade me?" The ally's expression didn't change. "So, you can listen." The millionaire hesitated, then stood. He brushed dust from his trousers, a reflex born of years of control. But the gesture failed to restore anything. The crowd instinctively stepped back, creating distance around him, not in fear, but in rejection. He was alone. "You laughed," the ally said calmly, pacing once in front of him. "You mocked. You tried to buy dignity with cash." The millionaire clenched his jaw. "I didn't know who they were." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The ally stopped. "That," he said, "is exactly the point." He turned and gestured toward the woman. "You didn't know who she was either." The woman lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with the attention. Her hands twisted together, fingers rough from years of work. She felt exposed, like kindness itself had been dragged into the open and put on trial. The ally continued, voice steady. "You assumed worth based on appearance, power based on noise, and you humiliated someone who never once asked for your approval." The millionaire swallowed. "I was joking." Arav stepped forward. The crowd shifted instinctively, making room for him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Jokes end when someone is hurt," he said. You kept going. Rohan joined him. "You weren't joking," he added. "You were testing how far you could push." Kunal looked directly at the millionaire. "And you thought no one would stop you." The millionaire's eyes darted around, searching for allies. He found none. The people who had laughed earlier now avoided his gaze. Some looked at the ground. Others stared openly, judgment no longer hidden. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I built half the city. People like you." He stopped himself, glancing at the boys. "You don't understand how the world works." The woman spoke then. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a blade through cloth. "The world works," she said, "because people eat." Every head turned. She lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, but in truth. Because someone grows food. Someone cooks it. Someone shares it. She looked at the millionaire, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. Pity. "You stood there and laughed," she continued. "But you never once asked their names." The crowd stirred. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. A man shifted uncomfortably, remembering his own laughter. The millionaire's shoulders sagged. "I didn't think it mattered." "That," Arvind said quietly, stepping forward, "is your greatest failure." He stood tall now, grief tempered into something resolute. "You think my sons survived because they were clever? Because they were strong?" He shook his head. They survived because someone treated them like human beings. Arvind turned to the woman and bowed his head again, though less formally this time, more personally. You gave them a place to exist without fear, he said. You gave them dignity. The word echoed.
Dignity.
The outsider ally addressed the crowd now. What you witnessed today, he said, will travel far beyond this market. Not because of wealth or scandal, but because it exposed a simple truth. He paused. Greatness is quiet. The millionaire took a step forward, panic creeping into his voice. So what now? He demanded. You ruin me? Is that it? The ally looked at him for a long moment.
No, he said.
You did that yourself. He gestured to the phone still recording. This isn't punishment. It's consequence. The millionaire's face twisted. I can apologize, he said quickly.
Right now.
If that's what you want. The woman stiffened slightly. Arvind glanced at her, silently asking. She hesitated. Apologies had never fed her. They had never paid rent or fixed broken burners. They had never stopped people from laughing. But they mattered. If you're apologizing, she said slowly, do it because you understand. Not because you're afraid. The millionaire swallowed hard. He looked at the boys. Then at her. I was wrong, he said. The words sounded heavy in his mouth. I judged without knowing. I thought money made me better. His voice cracked slightly. It doesn't. The crowd watched, breath held. I'm sorry, he said finally. For laughing. For humiliating you. The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Learn from it, she said. That's enough. The simplicity of her response stunned everyone. No demands. No revenge. No satisfaction taken. Just closure. The ally exhaled slowly, like a man who had seen this moment play out many times and still found it rare. Arvind turned to his sons. It's time, he said gently. They nodded, but none of them moved. Arav looked at the woman. We're not leaving like this, he said. Rohan gestured to the stall. Not without making something clear. Kunal turned to the crowd. Everything we are, he said, started here. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter. A small, worn notebook. This, he said, is where we wrote down what we learned every day. Words. Numbers. Ideas. He looked at her. You didn't know it, but you were our school. The woman covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. The crowd broke. Applause rose again, louder this time, unashamed. People stepped closer, offering nods, murmured apologies, quiet respect. A vendor called out, her food is the best. Someone else shouted, she fed kings. The woman laughed through her tears, overwhelmed. Enough, she said, embarrassed. Please. Arvind placed a hand over his heart. This story, he said, will be told, but not the way they expect. He looked at the millionaire one last time. And you, he said calmly, will live knowing you stood on the wrong side of it. The millionaire said nothing. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, buzzing with whispered retellings, the woman felt the market return, voices rising, movement resuming, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer invisible. Arav leaned close. Ready? He asked. She looked at her stall one more time, the place where it had all begun. Yes, she said quietly. Behind them, four black Mercedes waited. And for the first time in her life, she stepped forward, not as a woman feeding the hungry, but as someone the world had finally learned to respect. The engines didn't roar this time. They purred softly, respectfully, as if even the machines understood the weight of the moment. The four black Mercedes remained parked at the edge of the market, doors open, waiting, but not demanding. The woman stood beside her stall, hands resting on the counter one last time. She traced a familiar crack in the wood with her thumb. She remembered when it had appeared, years ago, after a long day when business had been bad and she'd slammed the pot down harder than she meant to. She smiled faintly at the memory. I'll be back, she murmured, though she wasn't sure to whom. Arvind Malhotra watched her quietly. He didn't rush her. Power, when earned properly, didn't need to hurry people. The boys stood close, not pulling, not urging. Just present. You don't have to come forever, Arav said gently. Just for now. She nodded. I know. As she stepped away from the stall, something unexpected happened. The old spice vendor approached first. He reached into his pocket and placed a small folded note on the counter. For the shop, he said gruffly. Until you return. Then another woman stepped forward. I'll watch it, she offered. No charge. One by one, people came. Not with grand gestures, but with small ones. Offers to clean.
To guard.
To keep the place alive. The woman's throat tightened. She had fed them quietly for years. Now the market was feeding her back. The millionaire stood at a distance, half hidden behind a pillar. No one looked at him anymore. His apology had emptied him of relevance. For the first time in his life, money had failed to buy attention. As the woman reached the car, she hesitated. She turned back. The crowd stilled instantly. I'll open again tomorrow, she said. Same time. A cheer rose, soft, warm, real. She got into the car. As the door closed, the noise of the market faded, replaced by a calm, insulated quiet. She sat stiffly at first, hands folded in her lap, unsure where to look. Arvind sat across from her. The boys took the seats beside her, close enough that she felt steady. You saved us, Arvind said quietly as the car began to move. She shook her head. I didn't know I was saving anyone. That's why it counts, he replied. The city slid past the windows, buildings growing taller, roads smoother, the world changing shape with every turn. She watched it all in silence, thinking of rice pots and cracked counters and 3 boys who never asked for more. The car slowed. They arrived at a quiet compound, green and open, guarded but peaceful. No flashing lights. No spectacle. Inside, the boys led her to a small room prepared just for her. Simple.
Clean. Warm.
You can rest, Kunal said. You've earned it. She smiled sadly. I don't know how to rest. Arav laughed softly. We'll teach you. That night, as she lay on a bed softer than any she had known, sleep didn't come right away. She thought of the first plate of rice, of the rain, of 3 quiet boys eating carefully, like they didn't want to be seen. Tears slipped silently into the pillow, not of sorrow, but of release. In the days that followed, her stall was rebuilt. Not into something flashy, but stronger, cleaner. Hers. The story spread, but it changed as it traveled. Some said she raised princes. Others said fate rewarded her. She knew the truth. She fed the hungry. Years later, for Mercedes-Benz had pulled up to her shop, not to show power, but to return dignity. And that, she learned, was what kindness always came back as.